Today we're going to talk about human disturbances on ecosystems. And the first thing I'd like you to do is to pause the video, and I'd like you to make a list of different ways that you think humans interact and can disturb or threaten or affect different ecosystems. This could be a wide range of things. I'd like you to just make a list. So go ahead and pause the video and make a list of what you think some of those would be. All right, hopefully you've got a good list here. And so some good examples, some examples of human disturbances on ecosystems would include some things like deforestation and logging, overfishing or overhunting, biodiversity loss, introduction of non-native species, both plants and animals. This is one that we don't always think of right off the top of our heads usually, but this is definitely a significant impact on ecosystems. Burning of excess fossil fuels, overgrazing, fire prevention. These are all some examples of how humans can interact with and have a disturbance on an ecosystem. So we're going to talk about a couple of different areas of human disturbances, and the first is climate change. You've probably heard of climate change. It's kind of a hot topic in science. It's also sometimes referred to as global warming. And the idea behind climate change is that carbon in the atmosphere retains heat. It holds heat, and that's actually a good thing. We need heat in order to survive on our planet. It helps to support life. And so carbon helps to hold heat in the atmosphere. Carbon is in the atmosphere in the form of CO2. When we breathe, we give off or we exhale CO2, as many other organisms do, and that's a natural part of the ecosystem. That's a normal occurrence. Well, humans, one, because there's lots of humans, but also by burning fossil fuels and releasing methane, we have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we're going to look at a graph, and we can actually track this and see this over thousands of years. And so human activities such as burning fossil fuels, farming, the release of CO2 into the atmosphere can accelerate what happens naturally. It's natural for CO2 to be in the atmosphere. It's not natural for the amount of CO2s in the last couple hundred years. That's not natural. We'll take a look at that here. So to get an idea of how this works, we've got sunlight here, and it passes through the atmosphere and it helps to warm the earth. That's good. We need that to happen. That sunlight is crucial for plants to be able to photosynthesize, to help keep a stable, somewhat stable temperature on Earth. That's necessary. Some infrared radiation is given off by the Earth. That's normal. Most of it escapes back into outer space, allowing the Earth to cool. So we get a kind of balanced temperature on the Earth, and that's normal. Some of it's trapped underneath the atmosphere, and that's what helps to keep the Earth warm and sustain life. Well, the problem is if CO2 levels increase, if we get more CO2 levels in the atmosphere around the Earth, then less of this radiation and this heat is going to be able to escape. And so more of it's going to be trapped inside of our atmosphere and thus increase the temperature of the Earth and of the climate. We're able to actually track the temperature of the Earth and the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we can do that by extracting big long cores or kind of like pillars of ice in the Antarctic. By extracting that, we can measure from the ice samples the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere as well as the temperatures. It's a really cool process, but we can go back thousands of years and we can see this. And this graph is showing us how in the red the temperature changes over the years and how the CO2 level change. And if you look at this and you notice, you can see this very specific pattern of an up and down, up and down, up and down, in which the temperature in the red follows the blues, the measurements of CO2. And there's natural increases and decreases, peaks and valleys, and that's natural, and we can see that over thousands of years. But you can see today our CO2 levels are really a lot higher. And that's the problem, is there's natural ups and downs of the CO2, but today's current levels are much higher than they have been historically within the last couple hundred years, within the last couple thousands of years. And so it brings attention to the idea that and the possibility that the climate change could have some different effects on different regions, both some good and some bad. It depends on the region. And a couple examples of that include, like in North America, we could see decreased snow in the west, maybe increased intensity and duration of heat waves on the east coast. In Latin America, we could have some gradual loss of tropical forests, loss of biodiversity, changes in water availability for humans who need water in order to survive. In Europe, there could be increased risk of flash floods, increased coastal flooding, reduction of rain-fed agriculture could have some negative effects in Europe. All of these are from NASA's actual study of climate change. So there could be some very significant impacts if the climate change were to continue. If the temperature in regions were to increase and in other regions to decrease, that could cause some major changes for our ecosystems. The second area that we're going to look at is habitat loss. And the loss of habitat can occur through human actions such as deforestation, increase of pollution, expansions of cities. You think about a city, as it grows, more and more people move into that city and it kind of expands. And as more people move to the outskirts of the city, the suburbs, in order to build houses or apartments or buildings that humans use and need, we have to remove some sort of the natural environment, maybe cut down a little bit of a forest or remove a meadow. We have to do that in order to expand our cities. And when we do that, we're removing habitats that organisms use in order to survive. And so this can result in elimination of species, it can cause extinction, it can cause habitat fragmentation, in which a portion of the habitat is maybe cut in half or separated from one another, and it can remove oxygen-producing trees and forests. So this can be a major impact that humans have by removing forests, increasing pollution, expanding cities. The next area that we're going to look at is biodiversity. And biodiversity is the diversity, or all the different types of life. There's obviously lots of different types of life on the planet, and there's many types of life that we haven't yet discovered or even know about. In the rainforest, there's thousands of species that we don't know about, we haven't discovered yet, just because it's such a vast area. And loss of biodiversity means that we could lose some of these different advancements and different things that we rely on in order to survive. A lot of times our medicines and products that we use in medicine come from plants, sometimes from animals. Losing the habitat that these organisms live in would result in a loss of medical advancements, loss of technological advancements, extinctions of plant and animals, reduction of the stability of an ecosystem, ripple effect through trophic levels, which we'll talk about more in a minute, and deforestation, which we've already talked about. The effect on trophic levels can be huge. You think about if one species is removed from an ecosystem, such as maybe a herbivore. If that herbivore is removed from the population, it can cause a crash in the organisms that eat that herbivore. Let's say a wolf eats a rabbit. If the rabbit's removed from the population, the wolf is not going to have any food in order to eat, and so it's also going to die out and possibly become extinct. The species that the rabbit eats, maybe like some grass and some shrubs, the rabbit's not going to be there to eat them, and so they're going to increase and increase. So removal of one organism, as we've been talking about, all things are connected together, the removal of one organism is going to have some major effects on the trophic levels and a food web in an ecosystem. An example of that is wolves in Yellowstone. Wolves, a grazing habitat at normal level, plant population's normal ecosystem is good working order. So the wolves have predators that they're able to catch, like rabbits or beavers or other small organisms. If the wolves are removed from the population, their prey, the herbivores that they eat, are not going to be in check. There's going to be more and more and more of them, and so they're going to eat more and more of the plant population. So the herbivores are going to eat more of the producers, and it's going to throw that whole ecosystem out of whack. And so it's important that all of these species remain in balance, otherwise the removal of one or the decrease of one species is going to affect the entire ecosystem. This can also affect nutrient cycles. The loss of a species in an ecosystem disrupts the recycling of nutrients. We've talked about water cycle, and more importantly the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the carbon cycle. All of those contain or have plants and animals as part of the cycles. Without those plants and animals, the cycles are not going to be able to continue and exist how they traditionally have. So that would result in less nutrients available for other organisms. A great example of this is less salmon returning to inland streams because of maybe overfishing. It's going to decrease the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus for the forest ecosystems. Salmons return to streams and rivers in order to reproduce. When they do that, they bring with them in their bodies nitrogen and phosphorus. If there's less salmon returning to the rivers and streams in order to reproduce, there's going to be less of those nutrients available in those ecosystems. We're going to cover succession in class, but I'll include this quickly in this video in case you are absent or want a refresher. Succession is a sequence of events that repairs a damaged ecosystem. And there's two types of succession. The first is primary succession, and this is the idea that the development of an ecosystem in a previously uninhabited area. So if we were to start with rocks and soil, and there's really nothing living there, slowly that ecosystem is going to be developed. This would be primary succession. An example would be land with bare rock slowly acquires life, plants and then animals and then carnivores and et cetera, et cetera. A pioneer species is the first organism in that uninhabited area. So the pioneer species would be the first that moves into that uninhabited area. And we'll look at an example of this in class. Secondary succession is the reestablishment of an ecosystem in an area that was damaged. And a great example of that is the volcanic eruption of Mount St. Helens. Here's Mount St. Helens before, and here's after. And that volcanic eruption removed and destroyed essentially a huge portion of the life living there and had some major effects on that ecosystem. And we're going to look at this as a more specific example in class. So those are some ways that humans can interact and cause disturbances on ecosystems, as well as looking at some specific examples of succession. We'll continue looking at this over the next few class periods.